I never thought a child's excitement could feel so heavy. Mom, do you think Aunt Sloan will like my dragon story? Micah looked up at me from the living room rug where he sat cross-legged with his sketchpad balanced on his knees. Crayon dust smudged his fingers and a green dragon with smiling teeth curled around the page in front of him. He had added wings this time, big wide ones that shimmered with glitter from a half-dried glue pen. I made it fly through the lake house, he said proudly. Just like we're gonna do, I tried to smile. I'm sure she'll be surprised. I said not quite lying, but nowhere near the truth. Micah's eyes lit up. He was 7 small for his age and so full of stories he sometimes whispered them in his sleep. He had inherited my curls, my quiet stubbornness, and unfortunately my place in a family that had never known what to do with the quiet ones. The lake house reunion was this weekend. 3 days. That's all. Just a weekend. I stood at the kitchen counter with my mug of coffee going cold in my hands, staring out the window at nothing in particular. The invitation had come 3 weeks ago, typed printed formal. The Pierce family legacy weekend. My parents had rented out the lake house, hired a documentary filmmaker, my Uncle Ray, and organized a catered schedule that read more like a corporate retreat than a family gathering. Sloane's name was mentioned 4 times on the agenda. Mine, not once. It had been almost 4 years since I'd last been to the lake house. That time, Micah was barely 3, and Sloane had commented within minutes of our arrival that he seemed awfully sensitive for a boy. My mother Diane laughed and said he'd grow out of it. My father Franklin poured a scotch before noon and suggested I try not to overcomplicate things this time. That weekend ended with me crying in the car on the drive home, while Micah napped, clutching the stuffed otter my sister had scoffed at. But this year Micah wanted to go. He missed the lake. He wanted to see the cousins, most of whom barely remembered him, and he had been working on his dragon story for days. I didn't have the heart to say no. I just think we have to be careful, I said later that night, pacing my tiny kitchen as I held the phone between my ear and shoulder. Careful, Imani's voice crackled on speaker. Leona, you're about to walk back into a house where your sister once told you your parenting style was more therapy than discipline. You think they've changed? No, I said quietly. I think Micah deserves to at least try. You're not walking into peace, she warned. You're walking into hierarchy. I rested my head against the fridge. It's just a weekend. You've said that before. They haven't. Imani had been my best friend since college. She'd seen the worst of my family, the comments, the veiled criticism, the way my parents doted on Sloane, like she was their retirement portfolio come to life. Sloane had always been the polished one, the achiever, the one who looked like she belonged in their Christmas cards. I had been the soft one, the fallback plan, the daughter they sometimes forgot to mention, but I had Micah, and he was worth walking into that house again. The next morning, I finished packing his suitcase while he buzzed around the apartment in excitement. He wanted to bring his sketchbook, his stuffed dragon, and a copy of the bedtime story we'd written together. He asked if he could show everyone the part where the dragon finds its voice. That one made me pause. He didn't know. He couldn't possibly know how much that line meant, how many years I had spent biting back words at the dinner table, pretending that silence was the same as keeping peace. But somehow, even at 7, he understood that stories and voices mattered. I loaded the car while he danced around the driveway in his mismatched socks. My car was a used sedan with a dent on the rear bumper and a glove compartment that refused to stay shut. Sloane would arrive in her company SUV, no doubt wearing sunglasses that cost more than my monthly rent. The drive to the lake house was long and mostly quiet, save for Micah humming to himself and occasionally asking if dragons liked pine trees or if we'd see frogs at the dock. I answered as best I could, even as my hands stayed tight on the steering wheel. As we neared the familiar gravel road leading to the lake house, my chest began to tighten. The trees closed in tall and stately, just like the house that sat behind them, cedar-sided, 3 stories high, perched above Lake Trillium, like a summer estate in a forgotten novel. It was beautiful, and it had always felt like someone else's. Micah gasped as it came into view. "Mom, look, it's just like I remembered." I managed to smile. "It is." We pulled into the curved driveway behind a silver Mercedes. My parents. The driveway was already full, Sloane's black Escalade, 2 of my uncle's rental SUVs, and what looked like a van for catering staff. Everything looked orchestrated. Everything always was. As I helped Micah out of the car, he clutched his sketch pad to his chest. "Do you think Grandma will like my dragon?" I hesitated, then crouched beside him. "I think anyone who really listens will love it." He nodded solemnly and held my hand as we walked toward the front door. The wind smelled like pine and lake water. The house loomed ahead, big and perfect and deeply wrong. Inside that door waited my family, their smiles too wide, their hugs too staged, their words like invitations with fine print you didn't notice until it was too late. Just a weekend, I reminded myself. But as my son gripped my hand and the door creaked open, I knew the truth. Some weekends stretch longer than they should. And some stories, especially the quiet ones, aren't meant to stay silent forever. The door opened before we had a chance to knock. My mother stood there in white linen pants and a pale peach blouse, her hair pinned up in its usual French twist. The kind of woman who ironed her jeans and wore lipstick to the mailbox. Her eyes flicked over me once head to toe, pausing just a second too long on the hem of my cotton dress, the one I'd picked for being safe. Then landed on Micah with a bright, performative smile. "There's my favorite little storyteller," she said, voice rising half a pitch as she leaned down for a stiff hug. "My, how you've grown. So tall and chatty, I'm sure." Micah hugged her back politely, though I could feel the way his body leaned into mine after. He didn't answer, just held his sketchbook close and looked around the foyer with quiet curiosity. The house hadn't changed. Same wide pine floorboards, same oversized chandelier hanging from the second-story ceiling, same gallery of family portraits lining the hallway, Sloane's graduation photo in the center like it was painted by God himself. Mine 3 frames off-center and slightly tilted. "You're early," my mother said to me, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "Caterers won't be here until noon. You can put your things in the south guest room, same as last time." She turned and walked away before I could answer. I guided Micah down the hallway past the photographs, our footsteps muted by the woven rug that had been here since I was a child. The south guest room was the smallest of the 5 bedrooms, tucked beside the laundry room with a narrow window that overlooked the driveway instead of the lake. I set our bags down and helped Micah unpack his things, while he chattered about wanting to go down to the dock after lunch. He asked if he could draw a lake dragon. I told him he could draw anything he wanted. Back in the kitchen, I found my father standing at the island counter flipping through a printout with a red pen in hand. "Leona," he said with a nod, not looking up. "We're planning the family video schedule. Ray wants a few words from everyone. Keep your answers concise when it's your turn, all right, sure, Dad." I opened the fridge to store Micah's juice boxes, only to find it already packed with labeled containers and glass pitchers of lemonade. Everything here was planned down to the breath. I stepped aside as a caterer in a black polo brushed past me, carrying a tray of cheese. From the front door came the unmistakable sound of laughter, high, rich, and full of practiced ease. Sloane. "Guess who's finally arrived?" She called out, heels clicking on the tile as if announcing royalty. "Sorry we're late, Jonah. Forgot the garment bag, and I wasn't about to show up with a wrinkled dress." My mother appeared like a stagehand at curtain call. "Oh, sweetheart, you look stunning. That shade of navy is perfect on you." I leaned around the corner and saw Sloane in a sleek dress blazer draped over her shoulders, sunglasses still on. Jonah trailed behind her in a soft gray button-down, carrying her tote and 2 garment bags over one arm. He gave a polite smile to no one in particular and quietly set the bags by the stairs. Franklin moved to greet them both, pulling Sloane into a half hug and clapping Jonah on the back like a favored intern. "Glad you made it, kiddo," he said to her. "We were just talking about your new campaign. Can't wait to see what Ray gets on camera this weekend." Sloane smiled as if cameras were her birthright. "Let me know my call time and I'll make sure hair and makeup are on point." Ray, already in the dining room adjusting a tripod, gave me a small nod when I passed by. He was Franklin's brother-in-law, married to my Aunt Lila, and one of the few people in the family who ever treated me like more than a placeholder. Ray didn't say much, but he noticed things. The kind of man who watched before he spoke, and when he spoke, it mattered. Micah tugged at my sleeve. "Can I say hi to Uncle Ray?" "Of course," I whispered. He ran over to Ray, holding up his sketch pad like a trophy. "Uncle Ray, I made a dragon for the lake." Ray crouched beside him, smiling. "That right? Is it hiding in the reeds or guarding treasure?" Both Micah said, flipping to page 3. "It starts in the water, but then look, it makes friends with a turtle." "That's storytelling gold," Ray said seriously. "Maybe we should get you your own documentary crew." Micah beamed. In that moment, he looked like a child who belonged somewhere. Meanwhile, Sloane had swept into the living room like a weather system. She greeted each uncle and cousin like a talk show guest, laughing at their jokes, complimenting someone's watch, commenting on someone's hair. When her eyes met mine, there was a brief flicker, something unreadable, but then she smiled wide and air-kissed my cheek. "Leona. Love the dress. Very soft." She turned to Micah with a practiced warmth. "Hey, kiddo. Still telling those stories?" Micah nodded shyly, but didn't speak. I could see the way his hand tightened on the edge of his sketch pad. Jonah Sloane said, waving him over like she was ordering room service, "Can you take my sunglasses and get me some sparkling water? I think they stocked the fridge." He obeyed without comment, and I watched his face for any sign of strain. There was none. Only a small, tired patience I hadn't noticed in him before. I stood there for a moment, holding a paper cup of lemonade, feeling like I had stepped into a play where everyone else knew their lines. And I had been given the wrong script. Even Micah could feel it. He stayed near my legs, eyes darting around the room, too polite to interrupt, too quiet to be remembered. First to arrive, last to matter. But we were here. And for now, that would have to be enough. The afternoon sun fell through the big windows of the great room, casting long rectangles of light across the worn pine floors. The air smelled like lemon polish and something vaguely herbed from the kitchen. Micah had claimed a spot near the fireplace with his sketchbook and a box of colored pencils he'd insisted on bringing from home. He sprawled on his stomach, legs kicking slowly in the air, humming to himself as his pencil swept across the page. He talked softly as he drew just loud enough for anyone nearby to catch snippets of his story. "And the dragon lived in a cove near the dock," he said, tongue between his teeth, but only came out when the moon was out and only to talk to turtles. Or sometimes foxes, if they asked nicely. I leaned against the wall nearby, pretending to check my phone, but really just watching him. His voice was soft, melodic, almost like a running internal monologue that had spilled into the room. It wasn't intrusive. It was the sound of a child in his element. But even that, I knew, would soon become too much for this house. Ray walked in from the hallway, adjusting the mic on his shirt collar. "There's the storyteller," he said, with a warm nod toward Micah, then looked at me. "He's got a rhythm to him. Most kids do if you listen long enough." I smiled faintly. He's always narrating something, usually whatever's in his head. Ray crouched beside Micah. "Hey, champ, I'm setting up some cameras today. You okay if your dragon story gets caught in the background?" Micah looked up wide-eyed. "For real, like I'll be in the movie." Ray smiled. "Possibly. Your dragon, too." Micah gave a firm, serious nod, then returned to his sketchbook with renewed purpose. Ray stood, turning his attention back to his equipment. Your dad wanted some candid legacy footage. Said it would be good to have real interactions, not just the posed stuff. I raised an eyebrow. Does he know that means he won't get to direct every shot? Ray smirked. Let's just say I'm not turning off the lavalier mics unless someone's changing clothes. Everything else is fair game. That comment sent a small flicker of anxiety through my chest. This house thrived on appearances, on edits and omissions. Real interactions might expose more than Franklin Pierce intended. The room began to fill gradually with uncles' cousins, a few stray teenagers looking bored and already annoyed at the thought of no Wi-Fi for the weekend. Sloan was holding court on one of the white couch's legs, crossed elegantly, wine glass in hand. Diane was arranging a charcuterie board with surgical precision, brushing crumbs off the marble counter before they could settle. Micah's voice drifted upward again. And the dragon wasn't scary, even though everyone thought he was. He just didn't know how to be quiet in a house full of loud people. My stomach tightened. I glanced at Ray, but he was fiddling with the camera settings near the window. Sloane's laugh rang out from across the room. Oh, I do remember that client. Total nightmare. Had the emotional range of a slice of toast. Diane chuckled politely, then turned, cutting a piece of manchego and placing it just so. Her gaze fell briefly on Micah, who had moved on to narrating a scene where the dragon was trying to make friends with a fox. She sighed, loudly. Leona, she said, over her shoulder, still focused on the cheese. Does Micah always talk this much while he draws? It's just quite constant. Every conversation in the room seemed to pause just enough for that sentence to be heard. I kept my voice calm. He's just telling a story. That's how he processes things. Diane turned, dabbing her hands on a towel. Of course. I just think it might be hard for the rest of us to focus, especially with the cameras rolling. We want to capture everyone's thoughts, not just his right. Ray looked up but said nothing. Sloane sipped her wine, clearly uninterested. Jonah from a chair near the hallway shifted uncomfortably and looked toward Micah, then back down at his phone. Micah hadn't noticed. He was now drawing a turtle wearing a tiny crown. I wanted to say something biting, something about how a child's imagination was not a disruption, how a 7-year-old humming about dragons was not the most inappropriate sound to echo through this house. But I didn't, because in this house, silence was safer. Instead, I crouched down beside Micah and touched his arm. Hey, love, want to come finish that in our room before dinner? He looked up, blinking. Why, no reason. Just thought it might be quieter. Easier to focus. He shrugged and gathered his things. I watched his shoulders slump just slightly. As we walked back toward the guest room, I heard Diane say, I just worry. It's not easy for children who can't learn to filter. The world doesn't always reward constant expression. That sentence stayed with me as I helped Micah settle on the bed. He began coloring again, quieter this time, lips moving but no sound coming out. The world doesn't reward constant expression. No, in this house, it punishes it. Ray's camera light blinked faintly from the hallway, still rolling. Part of me hoped it had caught every word. The other part already knew, even with footage, some people only hear what they want to believe. I sat beside Micah, watching his dragon climb a hill of green marker. Mom, he said softly. Do you think the dragon's voice is too loud? I swallowed hard. No, baby. I think the dragon's voice is just right. And I meant it. Even if this house never would. The next morning began with the kind of choreographed ease that only happens when someone spent weeks planning how casual should look. The brunch buffet was set across 2 tables, one for food quiches, fruit platters, tiny pastries, and the other for drinks with iced carafes of orange juice, mimosas, and something labeled infused cucumber water that no one actually drank. Micah had woken early, eager to finish his lake house dragon story. He insisted on sitting near the big windows, that overlooked the water where the sun poured across the floor in long golden stripes. He had his sketchbook open pencils arranged in a careful arc around him and was humming quietly while narrating a scene where the dragon helps a lost baby duck find its mother. The adults gathered around the oversized dining table Franklin at the head Sloane, 2 seats down, Diane floating between kitchen and table like a hostess with a reputation to defend. Cousins were scattered between stools and side chairs, half listening to Sloane and half scrolling on phones beneath the tablecloth. Sloane was in full performance mode, seated perfectly upright in a blue silk blouse that somehow resisted every wrinkle. Ray stood off to the side with his camera rolling as she detailed her latest campaign, a cross-brand social movement aimed at rebranding eco-conscious living for high-end consumers. "It's not just a movement," she said, lifting her mimosa. "It's a lifestyle narrative." I stood by the drink table watching her speak with the kind of glossy authority she was known for, elegant, articulate, practiced. And then just beneath the surface, I heard Micah. "And the dragon didn't mean to knock over the nest, he was just trying to help, but his wings are big, so the ducklings got scared. But the turtle told them, he's not bad, he's just big and loud sometimes." "Girl sacree." And then he paused to flip the page. The dragon made a new nest out of grass and flowers, and the ducklings hugged his tail. His voice wasn't loud. It carried sure, but not in an intrusive way. Not any more than someone speaking across the table or laughing too hard at a story. Sloane faltered mid-sentence. She glanced toward Micah, then back at the camera, tried to recover with a tight smile. "Anyway," she said louder this time, "our campaign is scaling up to 5 new regions by Q4, and we've already onboarded 2 celebrity voices." Micah had turned to shade in the turtle. "The turtle's name is Vernon," he explained, to no one in particular. "He's very wise, and he wears a crown." Sloane's head turned again. This time she didn't smile. Across the table, Franklin muttered something to Diane, who responded with a barely contained eye roll. Ray's camera stayed trained on Sloane, but I noticed his shoulders tense. Micah, oblivious to the shifting energy, held up his sketchbook. "Mom, do you think dragons like mint leaves or rose petals better for nest decorations?" Before I could answer, a chair scraped hard against the floor. Sloane stood. Her heels clicked in sharp, purposeful beats across the hardwood as she crossed the room. I stepped forward instinctively, but I wasn't fast enough. In one fluid motion, Sloane snatched Micah's sketchbook from the floor, tore the page he'd just finished drawing, and held it up like an incriminating document. "This is why I asked for quiet during filming," she snapped. "You are not the center of attention, Micah. The world doesn't revolve around your made-up animals." He froze. His mouth opened just slightly, eyes wide behind his glasses. "Sloane." I said, my voice low, trying not to cause a scene, but she didn't even glance at me. She crumpled the page, dropped it to the floor, and with a disgusted sigh, slapped the back of Micah's shoulder with her open palm. "Enough." The sound, sharp, quick, undeniable, cut through the room like glass breaking. Micah stumbled forward a little. His hands went to his arms instinctively. He looked stunned, as if trying to understand what had just happened. For one horrible second, no one moved. Then Franklin chuckled. "Kids need to learn humility somehow," he said, reaching for his coffee. Diane, without missing a beat, laughed that tinkling, dismissive laugh I'd heard my whole life. "He talks so much. Maybe this will teach him some quiet." I stared at them. Then I looked at Micah, my son, my little boy who had spent the entire drive here perfecting a story about a dragon who just wanted to be understood, was blinking hard. His cheeks flushed with confusion and shame, his lips trembling like he was trying to keep from crying in front of a room that wouldn't understand anyway. I moved to him, kneeling to wrap my arms around his shoulders. "It's okay," I whispered, though it wasn't. "You're okay." Sloane crossed her arms, still standing over us. It wasn't a real slap. "Don't be dramatic, Leona." I turned my head slowly. "He's 7. He's disruptive," she shot back. This was a professional segment. He's not the only one here, you know. Micah was crying silently now, tears sliding down his cheeks even as he tried to push them away with the back of his hand. I stood placing myself between Sloan and my son. My hands were shaking. "You don't touch my child," I said, my voice low and flat. "Ever," Sloan scoffed. "Please." It was a tap. "You act like I threw him through a wall." Franklin folded his newspaper with a crisp snap. "Leona, you're overreacting again. You've always been too sensitive about discipline." I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to ask them what part of this situation didn't feel broken to them. Instead, I gathered Micah's sketchbook and the crumpled page, straightened it as best I could, and held it in one hand while I led him out of the room with the other. As we walked away, I heard Diane say, "Honestly, I don't know how she expects him to thrive if she coddles him like this. The real world isn't going to applaud every doodle." But the world had watched. Ray's camera hadn't stopped rolling. I glanced back just once as we reached the hallway. Ray met my eyes, his face unreadable, but his hands were still steady on the lens. Later, I'd remember that detail, how he didn't flinch, how the red light on the mic pack still blinked. But in that moment, all I could think about was how small Micah's shoulders looked as they shook beneath my hand, and how quiet he had become. Micah sat on the edge of the twin bed in our guest room, his sketchbook beside him like a bruised limb. He hadn't touched it since we left the dining room. His hands were clenched around the hem of his t-shirt, knuckles pale. I knelt in front of him, watching the tremble in his bottom lip, the way his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Do you want me to sit beside you or give you space?" I asked gently. He didn't speak, just lifted one hand and reached for mine without looking. I took it carefully, as though touching something cracked but not yet broken. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. I had seen him cry before. I'd held him after fevers, nightmares, scraped knees. But this was different. This was shame. And I hated them for putting it there. "You didn't do anything wrong," I whispered. He nodded without conviction. I tried again. "Micah, look at me." He finally did. "I need you to hear this. What happened back there was not your fault. Not for telling stories. Not for being loud. Not for being you." His lip wobbled. "She ripped the turtle." I blinked. "What?" He pointed to the crumpled page now smoothed beside him. "Vernon, the turtle. She tore him in half. That was what did it. Not the slap, not the shame, not the crowd. The turtle. His turtle. His symbol of patience, wisdom, and quiet strength." I wrapped both arms around him, pulled him into my chest. His body pressed against me like he needed to be absorbed back into safety. "She doesn't get to decide what's valuable," I said. "Not your stories, not your art, not your voice." Behind me, the hallway creaked. I turned, expecting a knock, maybe a cousin with awkward apologies, or Diane with another lecture dressed in civility. Instead, it was Sloan. She didn't bother with knocking. "Leona," she said, arms crossed over her pristine blouse. "We need to clear the air." I stood shielding Micah. "No, we don't." She sighed like a CEO handling a delicate HR complaint. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It wasn't even a real slap. I barely touched him." I stepped forward. "You humiliated a child in front of a room full of people. You ripped up his art, you mocked him, and then you hit him." Her jaw clenched. "It wasn't a hit. Then what was it?" "A correction," she said, like that explained everything, a reminder that he's not the main event. My mouth went dry. "You're not a teacher, Sloan, and you're not his parent. You're just someone who can't stand not being the loudest person in the room." She looked past me, her voice sweet and venomous. "Micah, sweetie, I'm sorry if I startled you." He didn't reply. Sloan turned back to me. "You know how sensitive he is. He cries when the grocery store's too bright. Maybe instead of dramatizing this, you should be thinking about how to help him adjust to the real world." "I am helping him," I said, my voice shaking, "by making sure he knows people like you aren't allowed to define him." A beat. She rolled her eyes. You always made yourself the martyr even when we were kids. Must be exhausting. And just like that, she pivoted and walked away, heels sharp on the hardwood voice, already lifted in casual banter as she rounded the corner. I stood there, not angry anymore, just tired. Tired of being minimized, dismissed, repackaged as unstable because I wouldn't nod along. A knock came a moment later. Softer, intentional. Ray. Can I come in for a second? He asked. Micah nodded before I could answer. Ray stepped inside and shut the door behind him. No camera, no gear, just him. I wasn't sure if now was the right time he began, but I thought you'd want to know everything that happened this morning. The audio mics picked it up. Clearly, I already reviewed it. My breath caught. Everything I asked. He nodded. From Sloan tearing the drawing to Franklin's little comment about humility. It's all there. I looked at Micah, who was now watching Ray with quiet interest. I don't mean to make things harder, Ray said, but I figured you should know you're not crazy. You didn't imagine any of that. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. He hesitated. I can give you a copy if you want, or send it directly to someone. I nodded. I'll let you know. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, Leona, you were right. That wasn't discipline. That was cruelty. He left. Micah looked up at me. What's a mic? I sat beside him again. It's like a little ear that remembers things people wish it wouldn't. He seemed to think about that. Like the dragon's ears, I smiled. Exactly. But this time, the dragon doesn't forget. For the first time all day, he smiled back. Just a flicker. But it was there. And so was something else. Not rage, not revenge, but clarity. And the first sliver of power. Micah had fallen asleep, curled up against my side, his breath slow and warm against my arm, his fingers still loosely holding the corner of his sketchbook like it was armor. I hadn't moved in nearly an hour. Outside our window, the lake shimmered in the moonlight, the wind sending ripples across its surface like a secret being whispered back and forth between trees. The house was quieter now, though not silent. Somewhere downstairs, I could hear the soft hum of the dishwasher, a drawer opening, a cork popping, the retreat after a public mess, everyone pretending nothing had happened. I was about to shift slowly, carefully to tuck Micah under the covers and free my arm when a knock came at the door. 3 quick raps. Hesitant. I slipped out from under my son and padded softly to the door, opening it just enough to peek through. It was Jonah. He stood in the hallway wearing an old flannel shirt and pajama pants, barefoot, his eyes glassy like he'd been drinking, though not enough to sway. He looked like someone who hadn't fully decided what side of a story he was on yet. But he'd come to the door, and that meant something. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, voice low. I nodded and stepped into the hall, pulling the door gently closed behind me. We walked a few paces toward the little sitting area at the end of the hallway, where the reading lamp cast a warm circle of light. I sat down on the edge of the armchair, ready for him to say something defensive, something dismissive, something fierce. Instead, he pulled out his phone. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me right now," he started, but I recorded something tonight. My pulse jumped. "What do you mean after brunch? After you left the room?" He rubbed his hand across the back of his neck. Sloan went off. Thought no one could hear her. But I stayed in the sunroom. I guess she didn't realize I was there. I recorded it. I stared at him. What did she say? He unlocked the screen, opened a file, and handed me the phone. There was a soft crackle of ambient sound chairs being moved, someone clinking a fork against a plate. And then Sloane's voice, sharp and brittle. "That boy is a weak little mistake. If Leona had any sense, she would have stayed on birth control and spared us all this drama. But no, she wanted a legacy project." My stomach clenched. The words didn't feel like daggers, they felt like acid. Slow, corrosive. Jonah spoke before I could. "I'm not defending her. I needed you to know you're not crazy. You're not imagining this. You didn't exaggerate anything. I stared at the phone like it was a cursed object. I hadn't expected validation. Not from him. Why did you record it? I asked finally. He looked down at his hands. Because I think I've been lying to myself for a long time. About who she is, about what this family is, and about the kind of man that makes me. That last sentence sat heavy between us. She always had claws, I said softly. But lately it's like she doesn't even try to hide them. He nodded. When she slapped Micah, something clicked. I didn't step in. I didn't say anything. I just watched. And afterward, I heard her laugh, and I thought, if I had a kid and someone did that to them... He trailed off. So what? Now I asked. Jonah took the phone back, locked the screen, slid it into his pocket. I've been thinking about leaving. It took me a second to process that. Sloan. He nodded. We've been married 10 years, and I've spent at least the last 5 convincing myself that I was lucky just to be in her orbit. That everything wrong between us was me not being ambitious enough, loud enough, magnetic enough. But this weekend, this was different. She didn't just hurt your kid. She humiliated him. She stripped something from him and called it discipline. There was silence for a moment. A long one. Then I asked the question I had never dared voice before. Why did you marry her? He let out a breath that sounded like it had been aging inside him for a decade. Because Sloan never doubted herself. Ever. And that was magnetic. I grew up in this family, knowing exactly where I ranked. She didn't care about rank. She cared about image. And I thought, that was freedom. And now I think maybe I mistook control for confidence. He looked at me. And maybe I let a lot of people get hurt so I could avoid conflict. I swallowed hard. It's not too late to change that. He gave a half smile. That's why I came to you. I'm not looking for an ally. I just didn't want to be another silent one. I nodded slowly. You said you recorded it, but Ray said the mics were running too. Jonah blinked. So there's more than one copy. Seems that way. We both sat with that revelation for a moment. More than one recording, more than one truth preserved. More than one way this family might finally be seen for what it was. He stood to leave, then paused. Whatever you do next, if you go public with this or just leave it in the drawer, I'll back you. Even if it costs me. I nodded. Thank you. As he disappeared down the hallway, I stood for a long time in the quiet. Not triumphant, not even vindicated, but steady. This wasn't just about what had been said or done. It was about what had been heard and what wouldn't be ignored anymore. The hallway was silent save for the distant tick of the grandfather clock downstairs. I slipped back into our room, careful not to wake Micah. But he was already sitting up in bed, eyes open, clutching his sketchbook like a lifeline. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't speak at all. Come here, baby, I whispered. He crawled into my lap without a word, his small frame folding into mine like he was trying to disappear. I didn't hesitate. I reached for my phone. The call connected on the second ring. Leona Imani's voice was groggy but alert. What's wrong? I need to come to you. Tonight, I said. She didn't ask why. I'll unlock the door. 15 minutes later, we were packed. I didn't even try to be stealthy. I didn't care if the whole damn house heard me dragging our suitcase down the stairs. Sloan, Diane, Franklin, they could all pretend to sleep while the rot festered under their roof. But I wouldn't let my son breathe another hour of that poison. Micah carried his sketchbook, now carefully holding the torn pieces from earlier between its pages. Not folded, not crumpled, just held, like broken wings waiting for glue. We drove through the night with the windows cracked, letting in the crisp air off the lake. I didn't speak, neither did he. When we arrived at Imani's small craftsman bungalow, the porch light was on. She opened the door in a hoodie and leggings. No questions, no lecture, just the kind of silence that feels like safety. I hugged her with one arm. She pulled us both in. Micah didn't even look around. He walked into the guest room, opened his sketchbook on the desk, and began drawing. No words, just lines, smooth, careful, focused. Imani watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. I didn't want to go nuclear, I whispered. She shook her head. Leaving isn't weakness. It's restraint. I have 2 recordings, one from Ray, one from Jonah, both with her voice. She raised an eyebrow. The golden daughter finally caught on tape. I nodded. But I didn't want to drop the match while Micah was still in the house. He deserves to feel safe before he sees justice. I looked into the guest room where my son had filled half a page already. A new turtle, smaller, but surrounded by stars this time. He's not crying anymore, I said. He's quiet, but not broken. Imani handed me a mug of tea. You're both allowed to be quiet. That doesn't mean you're not strong. I sat down at her kitchen table. I didn't even pack everything. I just grabbed what we needed, left the rest behind like I was escaping something dangerous. Because you were, she said plainly, maybe not fists. But what they do, what they allow, it bruises differently, deeper, and sometimes longer. I felt the tears before I realized they were coming, but they didn't spill over, just hovered there, making everything sting. I wanted him to know he mattered, but for years I thought if I stayed quiet and polite, eventually the family would see him. Imani set her mug down. Leona. They saw him. They just didn't care. Silence. Heavy. Whole. I have the proof now, I said. Real, undeniable. But I don't know what to do with it. Not yet, she replied. Right now you rest. You let him draw. You let your heart settle. Because when you decide to use it, it's not just about revenge, it's about clarity. I looked over again. Micah had finished the turtle and was now drawing a tiny microphone. He hadn't heard a single word we said, but somehow he understood. He was drawing the truth, and this time no one would tear it from him. Dr. Hanley was the kind of pediatrician you trusted immediately. No fake sing-song voice, no high-pitched condescension, just a calm presence and eyes that studied your child like they mattered, like they weren't just a file in a folder. She took her time, checked Micah's vitals, listened to his lungs, asked questions about sleep and appetite. He didn't answer, just nodded or shook his head with small clipped motions. I sat in the chair beside him, holding the strap of my purse like it anchored me to the floor. At one point, she asked gently, "May I take a look at your shoulder, sweetheart, where you said it hurt?" Micah hesitated, then pulled down the collar of his shirt just enough. Her face didn't change, not noticeably, but I saw it. The subtle intake of breath, the stillness of her hand, a faint bruise blooming at the edge of his shoulder blade like a muted fingerprint. She didn't ask how it happened. Not yet. Instead, she turned to me. "Has he seen anyone since I shook my head?" "We came here straight from a family event." We left that night. She nodded slowly, then stepped out to make a call. When she returned, she knelt in front of Micah and said, "I'd like you to meet someone. Her name is Dr. Shapiro. She's really good at understanding big feelings. Would that be okay?" Micah looked at me unsure. I bent down beside him. Just like you help Vernon Turtle figure out his world, she helps kids figure out theirs. He blinked once, then nodded. Dr. Shapiro had a warm office full of quiet textures, wood-felt soft books, gentle colors. Nothing flashy, nothing overstimulating, a table with markers and modeling clay, a couch that didn't swallow you. She met us in the waiting room and crouched so she was eye level with Micah. "You must be the artist," she said. "I heard you have quite the imagination." He looked at her, then slowly unzipped his backpack and pulled out the sketchbook. "Would it be all right if we talked in here while your mom has a cup of tea next door?" she asked. Another nod. I stepped into the adjacent room, but the door stayed slightly ajar. I didn't expect to hear much. But after 10 minutes, Dr. Shapiro gently cleared her throat. Leona, I stood and walked in. Micah was sitting on the small couch, hands in his lap, his sketchbook open on the table. Dr. Shapiro was seated beside him, not close but not distant either. She turned the book toward me. The drawing was unmistakable. Sloane stood tall in the center of the page, her face drawn with sharp lines, her mouth open in a jagged triangle. Her hands, unlike the rest of her gray-toned body, were bright red, not shaded, colored in heavy, angry strokes that bled outside the lines. Next to her, Micah was small, curled slightly, and over his mouth a heavy black zipper, closed, no teeth showing, just a single padlock dangling from one end. Dr. Shapiro waited a beat, then spoke. Micah didn't describe this to me, but in child psychology, we often use art as narrative when language doesn't feel safe. I swallowed hard. What does it mean? I asked, though I already knew. He's expressing trauma. The red hands suggest an act he's internalized as violent or dangerous. The zipper silencing, either perceived pressure to stay quiet or a lack of agency to speak. Micah's face was blank, but his fingers trembled. She continued gently. Has he spoken at all about the event? No, I said, only that she tore his turtle drawing. He hasn't said a word about the slap. That's common, especially in children who sense that speaking up may cause disruption or further pain. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Do you believe he's in danger now? I asked. No, not now, she said, but he was. And he's carrying the imprint of that moment. Dr. Shapiro folded her hands. You did the right thing by bringing him here. His healing will depend on consistent validation that what happened was wrong and that he's safe now. I turned to Micah and knelt beside him. I believe you, I said softly. Even if you don't tell me with words. Even if you never want to say it out loud. Yeah, he looked at me then. Not long. Just long enough for his eyes to shine. Dr. Shapiro added, I'd recommend continued sessions, and we can provide documentation if needed. If this escalates to a formal report, Micah's art and my notes may be useful. I nodded, then looked at my son. He had drawn the truth. And finally, someone besides me had heard it. I didn't send it in anger. Not at first. The anger had passed days ago, burned clean like a fire that had done its damage, and left behind something quieter. Something clearer. I waited until Micah was asleep, curled up under the throw blanket Imani kept on the couch, his sketchbook still open beside him. The turtle page, the one he'd redrawn 3 times, each one a little stronger, a little more sure. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and opened a blank email. It was time, not to explode, not to rage, to reveal. I started with the audio. Not the full file, just a 38-second clip Jonah had helped me trim down. His voice wasn't in it. Neither was mine. Just Sloane. Crystal clear. That boy is a weak little mistake. If Leona had any sense, she would have stayed on birth control and spared us all this drama. Followed by Franklin's chuckle. Diane's breathy, derisive laugh. No context could justify it. No PR spin could bleach it. I saved it as Pierce statement, clip.wav. Next, I took a photo of Micah's sketch, the one with the red hands and the zipper mouth. It wasn't art, it was evidence. And finally, I scanned the 1-page letter Dr. Shapiro had written at my request. It was professional clinical, but still cut deep. In my professional opinion, Micah exhibits symptoms consistent with recent emotional trauma, which he has communicated through nonverbal expression. His artwork clearly indicates a memory of physical harm, silencing, and perceived threat. I strongly recommend ongoing care and review of environmental factors related to this incident. I read it 3 times, not to question it, but to absorb how clearly the truth came through when someone with authority dared to say it out loud. I packaged the files into a digital drive, password protected, named it Micah First Truth. And then I wrote the emails, 3 separate messages, each one tailored, measured, sharp, to Sloan's PR firm as an agency representing a public figure whose brand is built on empowerment and maternal warmth. I thought you should be aware of a recording made during a private family event this month. The behavior captured may not align with the values you promote. Please find attached documentation. Should the content be leaked externally, I wanted you to have context beforehand. To the literacy nonprofit where Sloan was a celebrated board member. As a mother and former donor, I'm heartbroken to share this. Your board member Sloan Pierce recently behaved in a way that stands in stark contrast to your mission to protect and uplift children's voices. My son, age 6, was the target. Included audio therapist documentation and expressive artwork. To the Regional Parent Coalition, she loved to headline, "At your advocacy for children's mental health is why I'm writing. I hope this never happens to another child under the watch of someone you endorse." The woman in this recording may lead parenting panels. But this is what she does when no one's supposed to be listening. Each email was brief, unemotional, letting the truth do the work. I reread them, then hovered over send, and paused, not out of doubt, but out of grief. Because once I clicked, nothing would be the same. There'd be no family meeting, no apology casserole, no whispered, "Let's not make this public." This was the moment I stopped asking to be believed and started choosing to be heard. I clicked, send all, closed the laptop, went to the couch. Micah stirred slightly in his sleep. I tucked the sketchbook closer to his side and kissed the crown of his head. "You don't have to speak, baby," I whispered. "I've got it from here. It wasn't me. I'd planned for quiet pressure, calculated distribution, whispered reputational fallout, quiet doors closing behind the scenes. But Jonah had other ideas. Late that afternoon, Imani handed me her phone. "You need to see this." It was a post on Facebook. Public. From Jonah. At the top, a screenshot of the audio file waveform. Below it, a photo of Micah's sketch, the one with Sloan's red hands and his mouth zipped shut. The caption read, "This is what our family tolerates. This is what silence protects. That boy is my nephew, and he deserves a world that believes him the first time." The full audio clip was attached. Not just the 38 seconds I'd sent out. Jonah had uploaded the whole 3 minutes, laughter included. By the time I opened the post, it had over 100 shares. 30 minutes later, it passed 10,000. I stared at the screen numb. "It's out," I whispered. "It's all out." Imani sat beside me. "Jonah didn't name you. He didn't tag Sloan, but everyone knows." And they did. The comments flowed like a storm surge. As a teacher, this hit hard. I see kids like Micah every day. The zipper mouth. I'm shaking. My daughter used to draw like that before we got her out. People like Sloan run schools, boards, churches. That's why this matters. My brother did this to my son. I didn't have proof. Thank you for this. Hundreds of them, then thousands. My inbox flooded. Messages from parent survivors, even a retired child psychologist, offering free art-based trauma workshops. I didn't feel vindicated. Not at first. I felt exposed. But then I looked at Micah, sitting cross-legged on the rug cutting shapes from construction paper. He was humming, low steady, the way he used to before the lake house. And I realized he didn't know. Not about the internet, not about the firestorm his drawing had sparked. He just knew he was safe. And being heard, for the first time being heard, hadn't required him to say a single word. I opened one message from a stranger. "My son used to draw red hands too. I never understood what it meant until it was too late. You just saved someone else's child, maybe mine too." Another, "I work at a parenting advocacy group. If you're ever ready to speak, we'd love to have you." Another, "I was Micah. I grew up thinking no one saw me. Thank you for seeing him." I scrolled breath-shallow tears somewhere just behind my eyes but not quite falling. This wasn't justice, not yet, but it was something louder than shame, louder than family silence, and louder than Sloan. I got up, walked into Micah's room. He was taping something together, 2 cutouts, one of a turtle, the other of a microphone. He held it up. "Vernon Turtle has a voice now," he whispered. I smiled, knelt beside him, and hugged him close. "Yeah," I said, and the whole world's listening. The phone call started just before noon, first from a blocked number, Sloan's firm. A curt voicemail from the managing partner. "Effective immediately, Ms. Pierce has been placed on indefinite suspension pending internal review. We will make no further public comment at this time." An hour later, an email from the literacy nonprofit. "The board has voted unanimously to remove Ms. Pierce from her position. We take our responsibility to children seriously and cannot allow our leadership to contradict our mission." By evening, Sloan's name had disappeared from every official bio, every panel flyer, every speaker's page she used to boast about. It was surreal watching her legacy evaporate pixel by pixel. But the real fallout came the next day. Franklin showed up at my apartment. I didn't invite him in. He stood in the hallway wearing one of his old golf shirts, sweat at the collar. His face was flushed, not from shame, but rage. "You've torn this family apart," he said. "I didn't hit a child," I replied. His jaw clenched. "You could have handled this privately." I met his eyes. "You mean silently?" He shifted his weight. "You embarrassed us. You made us look like monsters." "I didn't make anything," I said. "You looked away when she hit my son." "That's what people saw." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Then she's your sister." "She's his aunt," I shot back. "And you're his grandfather. And not one of you protected him." For the first time, he looked tired, old. "I don't recognize this version of you," he said. "Maybe you never tried to." He didn't argue, just turned and left. Not 10 minutes later, Diane called. She didn't yell. She cried. "I know it was wrong, Leona. I know that," she said, "but people are cruel. Sloan's getting death threats. You could fix this. You could post something softer." I almost laughed. Softer. You could say it's being handled privately now, that the family's working through it, that it was exaggerated. I looked at Micah sitting quietly on the floor with a pair of safety scissors and construction paper, making a new puppet, this one, with a wide open mouth and hands colored blue. Healing. Not exaggerated. I'm not posting anything I said. "But you're welcome too." Her breath hitched. "You always wanted her to fail." "No," I said calmly. I just stopped helping her pretend she was perfect. She hung up without saying goodbye. And then came Jonah. He didn't call. He came in person late that night, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I'm done," he said. I stayed too long. He sat down at our kitchen table and took a deep breath. I kept thinking she'd grow, or at least soften, but she doesn't want to. She wants applause, not accountability. I offered him tea. He accepted. We sat in silence for a moment as the kettle hissed. "I loved her once," he said. "I probably still do. But it's not the kind of love that changes anything. It's the kind that hopes while she keeps hurting people." I nodded. "Thanks for posting it," I said. He looked at me. "Thanks for not stopping me." Jonah slept on the couch that night. Micah offered him a blanket and one of his stuffed turtles. It wasn't just Sloan's fall. It was the collapse of everything we'd been forced to uphold. The myth of the perfect sister, the golden daughter, the smiling family, all gone. And in the rubble, something honest, something that might finally heal. The invitation came on thick cream cardstock hand-delivered by courier. No group text, no email thread, just 6 words embossed in gold foil: family meeting. Lake House, This Saturday, noon, signed at the bottom, Evelyn Pierce. Grandma Evelyn didn't make requests. She issued summons. So we went. It had been 2 weeks since Jonah's post detonated online. 2 weeks since Sloane's sponsors evaporated, since her panels were canceled, since the sunny lifestyle photos stopped posting. Micah was quieter but steadier, still drawing, still carrying Vernon Turtle. I asked him if he wanted to come. He nodded. Will Jonah be there? Yes. Okay, Imani drove us. She didn't say much, just squeezed my hand at every red light. The lake house looked the same. Still grand, still curated, still cold. But inside, everything felt different. Evelyn had rearranged the furniture into a circle. No decorations, no brunch spread, no cameras, just 12 chairs. Sloane was already seated, no makeup, hair tied back, expression unreadable. Franklin sat stiffly beside Diane, both dressed like they were attending church and a trial at the same time. Jonah was across the circle, flanked by Ray and his younger sister. And in the center on the coffee table sat an old cassette recorder. Evelyn stood beside it, her posture perfect despite her cane. I've called you here, she said, voice clear and deliberate, because silence runs in this family. Like a disease. And I have watched it rot every generation, including mine. No one moved. She clicked the recorder. Sloane's voice filled the room, cruel and confident. That boy is a weak little mistake. If Leona had any sense, she would have stayed on birth control. Diane flinched. Franklin looked away. Evelyn let it play. All of it. Then she reached into a folder and pulled out Micah's drawing, the red hands, the zipper mouth. She held it up with 2 fingers like evidence in court. This, she said, turning to Sloane, it is the only true thing you've left behind. Sloane's jaw tensed, but she didn't speak. You built your career on image, Evelyn continued. On slogans about protecting children, about being the voice for the voiceless. But when a real child needed protecting, you silenced him. And now the world sees it. So do I. Sloane shifted in her seat, but Evelyn wasn't finished. She turned to Leona. I watched your mother get dismissed in this house, heard Franklin tell her she was too sensitive, heard me tell her to keep the peace. I never stood up. I never made it right. Her voice cracked slightly, the first fracture in Evelyn Pierce's composure I had ever seen. You did what I never did, she said. You chose truth over comfort. And that is what breaks a cycle. Diane let out a quiet sob. Franklin said nothing. Sloane finally spoke, barely above a whisper. You don't know what it's like to lose everything overnight. Leona looked at her calm and unblinking. I do. You just didn't notice when it happened to me. Evelyn stepped forward, placing the drawing at the center of the circle. This stays here, she said. A reminder of what it costs to protect appearance over people. She tapped the drawing once, then turned to leave. Micah, seated beside me, reached for the drawing. Evelyn paused, watching him gently fold it and tuck it into his sketchbook. Then she nodded. Just once. Approval. Not performance. Legacy finally rewritten. No one applauded. No one clapped backs or exchanged hollow promises. We just sat in the quiet. And for the first time in generations, no one filled it with lies. The gallery was tucked behind a community library in a neighborhood where people still left handwritten signs in their windows and stopped to talk over chain-link fences. It was small, just one room with white walls and soft lighting. But for Micah, it might as well have been the Met. The exhibit was called What We See. It showcased work from children across the city, curated by a team of pediatric therapists and local artists. No ribbons, no rankings, just space. Micah gripped my hand tightly as we walked in, the laces of his sneakers knotted twice and his favorite corduroy vest buttoned all the way to the top. Imani joined us near the back, holding a small flower bouquet and blinking more than usual. He didn't let go of my hand until he spotted his drawing on the far wall. It wasn't flashy, just a piece of sturdy white paper matted neatly and framed in light pine. The image was simple, a small boy drawn in Micah's familiar pencil strokes, standing on top of a hill shaped like a microphone. His arms were outstretched, his mouth was wide open, not screaming, not afraid, just open. At the base of the hill were red smudges shaped like hands. Fading. The title printed on the placard below read, "The Day I Wasn't Quiet. Micah P., age 6. A woman with silver hair and soft eyes stepped beside us. He's yours," she asked. I nodded. She smiled. That piece stopped me cold. So much power in so few lines. Micah looked up at her and whispered, "It's about a day I didn't hide." The woman blinked, then crouched to his level. "Well, I'm really glad you didn't." He nodded once. Later, as we walked back to the car, Micah held the program folded in his pocket like it was a medal. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The picture had spoken for him. And this time, the world had listened. It wasn't about the slap. That's what I opened with standing under the soft glow of fluorescent lights in the basement of a community center, facing 30 folding chairs, 25 of them filled with parents who looked more tired than hostile. Micah sat in the front row, legs swinging slightly, Vernon turtle tucked under one arm. It wasn't just about what happened at that brunch, I said. It was about all the years before, all the looks, the shrugged-off concerns, the "you're being too sensitive," the "she didn't mean it like that," the silence that settles like dust and coats everything until you forget what clean air feels like. Some heads nodded. A few people lowered their eyes. I was raised in a family that prized appearance over accountability. My job was to be the peacemaker, the quiet one, the one who didn't make things worse. I looked directly at a woman near the back whose toddler had been fidgeting noisily the whole talk. She looked mortified. I smiled, but keeping quiet didn't protect anyone I said. Least of all my son. Micah looked up then, right at me. Just a glance. But steady. The day my son was slapped wasn't the worst part, I continued. The worst part was seeing how easily everyone around him justified it. How quickly it became a non-event. Because that's what silence does. It makes harm feel normal. It makes children believe they're overreacting. Or worse, unworthy of protection. A father raised his hand. "What would you say to people who think you blew it out of proportion?" I paused. "I'd say they're asking the wrong question." I replied, "The question should be, why didn't anyone stop it before it got to that point? Why did a child need to carry the burden of adult egos? Why are we more upset by discomfort than by harm?" A few more heads nodded now. I closed with what I had written the night before alone at the kitchen table, while Micah slept in his Star Wars pajamas. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every parent who's been told they're too reactive, too emotional, too much. And it belongs to every child who was ever told to use an inside voice when what they really needed was someone to raise theirs on their behalf. I took a breath. "Your child's voice is never too loud," I said. "What's too loud is your silence." Micah clapped first, a little too fast, a little too hard. But I didn't stop him. The room followed. Not thunderous, not theatrical, but enough. And for once, and that was exactly right,